we heard some staggering numbers of the prevalence of domestic violence in the United States. And as you can see, there are some additional stats here. But what's not here is a few other things I want to talk to you about. That domestic violence accounts for more injuries and deaths than auto accidents, muggings, and rapes combined. 6 million women in the United States are beaten each year by their partners, and as the district attorney said, that's 1 in 4. Each year, domestic violence results in nearly 100,000 days of hospitalization, 30,000 emergency room visits, and 40,000 physician visits. Combine these statistics with the fact that most women in 2011 work. You just heard how many employees this very small group of businesses accounts for. I want to talk to you a little bit about domestic violence. Mary touched on it for a little bit during her introductions, but I think it's important you, as the representative of your corporation here today, make sure that you take back a full understanding of domestic violence, because as those that are now on the forefront in Western Mass of employers, we can't take on domestic violence in our workplaces unless we fully understand its effects and the dynamics. Mary touched on effects on the victim, and she asked that really important question. We all say, why doesn't she just leave? We should never say that again. The question you should be asking, why does he keep beating her? Because it's his actions, not the victim's actions, that is the creation of domestic violence. My new friend over here had a very good point. It's embarrassing for victims to disclose that they are victims of domestic violence. But why is that? And that's because society has put a stigma on domestic violence. That if you are a victim of domestic violence, something's wrong with you. You are doing something wrong. When in fact, if you're a victim, you've done nothing. Somebody has chosen to assault you, insult you, psychologically abuse you. So we need to start asking, why does he continue to abuse her, and how can we get him to stop abusing her? That's what's fabulous about their high-risk program out here, is that it focuses on the abuser and the abuser's behavior and containment and holding that offender accountable, because that is the cause of the domestic violence. Nothing that the victim or his or her children are doing sets off an abuser. It has so many effects on victims. Somebody might be depressed, somebody might have PTSD, somebody might feel numb, have low esteem, guilt, embarrassment, self-blame. But for each victim, it's not just one of these emotions or effects. It is, probably hundreds of different effects on that victim's lives. And as we look to eradicate domestic violence and work with our victims as employers, we have to remember all the different facets and all the different effects on a victim. There are so many challenges, but the biggest one is financial. Who over here said financial? It's the biggest one. I've worked with a lot of women who go back because they've tried to leave. They go back because I'm now out. I'm sort of safe. I think I'm safe. But now me and my children are homeless. We have no place to live. Because of the violence and the history of violence in the relationship, my abuser has isolated me from my friends and family. A big thing on abusers' power and control is isolation. They get you to stop talking to your family and friends. So by the time she leaves, she doesn't have anyone to go to financially help and support her, because they're sick of helping her. They've helped her so many times. So finances, remember that as an employer, you are the #1 helping and assisting factor for a victim that wants to leave an abusive relationship. There are other barriers. a lot of victims, and this is an effect too, but it's also a barrier, is substance abuse issues. We have a lot of victims that I see in court every day that have a substance abuse issue. And we blame that victim, you know what, if she didn't drink so much, maybe there wouldn't be violence in the home. But maybe we should turn that around. If there wasn't such violence in the home, maybe she wouldn't drink so much. It's called self-medication. If you lived with some of the men that we prosecute in my county and in this county or these counties, you would probably drink a little bit more too, or start using prescription drugs that aren't yours. So think about that if you have an employee that has a substance abuse issue and might also be in a domestic violence relationship. What is causing it? I'm going to guess and guarantee you that it's the substance abuse. The domestic violence is causing the substance abuse. Remember that power and control that a batterer has over their victim? One of them is honing in on that substance abuse issue and feeding the substance abuse. I had one woman that finally went to rehab, was cleaned up. Unfortunately, she was going back home to the same house with her abuser, thinking that they could work things out. And when she got back to the home, want to know what the only thing in the refrigerator was? Fridge full of her favorite beer. So that is his power and control, continuing using her substance abuse issue against her. But we talked a little bit about, Mary talked a little bit about the other challenges to leaving. Fear, threats, threats to call DCF. I have more offenders that call DCF to file false reports of neglect. We pick up the phone all the time to say, hey, did so-and-so call on, Robbie Cahill call on Courtney? Yeah, we just want to let you know, we have a police report. That's part of a threat that he's making. You know, you should, let's work together to screen that out. That's a big fear of victims, is losing their children. If the defendant has the financial control in the relationship, they go to probate court, she can't support her and the children. There's a fear, and he's told her how many times, if we ever get divorced, if you ever leave me, I guarantee I will get those children in probate court. There's that fear. There's cultural beliefs, that it's okay to be abused. There are religious beliefs as well as cultural beliefs that the man is in charge and they can't leave. There's exhaustion. Do you know how exhausting it is to live in a violent relationship? Because it's not always violent. Remember that when you're dealing with somebody that might disclose to you, not every day is a violent day in their lives. There are days that there is love, that there are family vacations, there are a lot of good days in between. Because as Mary told you, it's a cycle. There might be some tension building, violence, and then a honeymoon period where there's promises, I'll change, I'll never do it again, and then it starts up again. I've worked with so many victims that say the psychological and emotional abuse, the threats, you're fat, I can't believe you even have a job, nobody would have you, you're lucky you have me. That psychological abuse, I've had many victims say, you know what? If he would just punch me or push me down the stairs, it would be over and we'd be back into good days again. I wish he would just hit me or be violent instead of these days and days of verbal and emotional abuse. So think about that when you're dealing with an employee. And one of the reasons that a challenge to leaving, you ever hear the phrase, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't? What is the most fatal time in a relationship for a victim of domestic violence? When they leave. A lot of the headlines on domestic violence homicides, just got a restraining order, just separated, filed for divorce. That's the most fatal time. But why is it the most fatal time?
They have less to lose.
Less to lose.
So raise the bar.
Mm-hmm. What's domestic violence about?
Control.
Control. What have they lost?
Control.
Lost all control. The victim has now left. And a lot of victims would rather have their abuser near them because they can gauge if it's going to be a violent day or not. I've had victims, I know when he pulled in the driveway that something was going to happen tonight. I knew by the way he threw his keys on the table that we were going to have a violent and long night last night. But if you're separated, you don't know. You can't gauge. So some of the reasons victims stay is because they feel safer, being able to gauge the abusive partner. I want to talk a little bit about abusers. It's a learned behavior. People are not born abusers. They do not abuse because they drink or do drugs. A lot of people say, well, he was drinking and that's why he did it. That's not why he did it. It's about power and control. And just like with anything, somebody uses substance abuse, has a few beers, what happens? Your inhibitions are lowered, right? And you do things that you might not normally do if you weren't drinking. All right, I graduated from UMass in 1990. I can attest to that. So there are, it's not substance abuse. They make promises, both promises and threats, to maintain the power and control. And remember, this whole violence, as Mary stated, it's directed towards one person and one person only. If the person was out of control, if the person just had an anger management problem, if the person just was violent, wouldn't they be violent to others in their lives? Why is it just this one person? And most abusers are Jekyll and Hydes, no matter their education level, their finance level, where they work, their religious or cultural affiliations. They are Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In their community, they're the best soccer dad, they're the best football coach, they're the best co-worker that anyone could have. It's when they get home and the door is closed that they become a different person. And that's hard for many, because one thing that batterers do is manipulate. So besides the victim, who else are they manipulating to look like this good guy? Everybody. In court, we see it all the time. Thank God for police officers that take photos. That's all I can say. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because in comes the abuser with some excuse about how, Courtney was just drunk. She wanted to drive and take the kids to McDonald's. I didn't want her to, so we wrestled to get the keys, and that's how her nose got broken. When I tell a totally different story about how Robbie broke my nose. But from the time that the police are called, they start to manipulate the system, the criminal justice system as well. They show up, they have this great story. For some reason, everybody wants to believe the abuser's story more than they want to believe the victim's story. I don't know why, but judges want to believe it, probation officers want to believe it. I know when you get to the door, they're already trying to manipulate you as to what happened. So these photos we are able to use in court to prove, no, that really good story that Robbie's telling you is totally inconsistent with what the police found in the home. So remember, if you're working with an employee that is an abuser, remember, they're trying to manipulate you to be on their side. Batterers and victims do three things the same. And remember this, no matter who you're dealing with, whether it's an employee that's a victim or an employee that's an abuser, they both minimize, they both deny, and they both blame. A victim is going to minimize the abuse, minimize the injury. Going to deny the abuse, deny the injury, and they're going to blame. It's my fault. It's not Robbie's fault. My brother's name is Robbie. He abuses me in every training or conference I speak at. Poor thing. So it's not Robbie's fault. It's Courtney's fault. If I had only done this, I know he likes dinner at this hour, or I know that when the Red Sox are on, he gets control of the clicker. So I start to blame myself as opposed to Robbie. And if you listen to a batterer, they do the same thing. Minimize it, first of all, deny there's any abuse in the relationship. And then once they're called upon the mat and there's proof that there is, start to minimize it. You know what? Really isn't that bad. I mean, when she fell down the stairs, she only sprained her wrist. It's not like she broke her wrist or broke any ribs. So it's really not that bad. And of course they blame. They blame the victim for the abuse. If she didn't do this, I wouldn't have had to react like that. I've told her so many times, I do not want her going out with her friend Kristen. And what do you think she did? She had the gall to go out with Kristen yesterday at lunch. I caught her. I was following her. I was watching her at work. Kristen came, picked her up. They were gone for about an hour and a half. And I told her not to be with Kristen. And so that's why I lost my cool. That's why I lost control. And finally about batters is that it's not about losing control. It is about full control. We see suffocation so many times. I don't know if anyone noticed how rude I was. I was texting while Mary was speaking, but it was because we had a really bad strangulation last night. I was trying to engage some police detectives on a warrant to go arrest this guy. He's out on bail from a previous, not that we didn't ask for a higher bail, but on for bail on a previous strangulation from March. He again broke into the house and strangled her. That is what strangulation is about, is control. When we talk to our victims and they talk about strangulation, I could kill you right now. You know what? If I keep pressing on you, you're going to die. Do you want to die? Okay, if you want to die, if you don't want to die, are you going to do what I tell you to do? So remember, domestic violence is about control. If it's in your community, then it's in your workplace. If it happens in 1 in 4, how many, I should have been trying to keep the numbers in my head, but I went to law school because I can't do math, so I couldn't do that quick addition. So let's say you guys had thousands, 8,000 over there. So let's even say 15,000 employees are affected and work for these companies. So a quarter of that, of the people that are employed by our agencies, are victims of domestic violence sometime in our lives. Employers can't ignore. They just can't ignore domestic violence. Because it affects the workplace. No matter how much you want to deny it, it affects the workplace. It affects the workplace in a few different ways. And they're all this same word. Cost, 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 and cost. Sometimes it's easier for you employers that are here, if you have upper management that you need to sell this to, looking at domestic violence in the workplace and trying to help your employees. That's the one thing that can sell it to your employer, or the CEO of your company. Cost, cost, and cost. CDC, Center for Disease Control, estimates the annual cost of lost productivity is $727.8 million a year. Domestic violence costs you as employers. Just employers alone, that's how much it costs. They did a survey of senior executives. 61% said that domestic violence does have a harmful effect on their company, and 70% that it negatively affects attendance. But there's more to that. The number one cost that we need to address this is the cost that Kate and Yoko faced. It's the cost of human lives. It's the cost of tragedy that can happen either at the workplace or to one of our employees. Another cost is lost productivity. Whose productivity is counted in that? Everybody's. Co-workers, the person in the cube next to the victim. So it's not just the victim's productivity that we're talking about. It's anybody in the company that knows about the violence and is assisting the victim, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Where was my healthcare table? A couple of healthcare people, right? 35% of all females in an emergency room at any given time are there because of domestic violence. Think about the last time you were in an emergency room. That's a lot of females. For all of you that deal with the insurance benefits and health care insurance at your companies, domestic violence victims cost the employer an average of about $1,800 more a year in medical costs. So think about that. Just increased health care cost to you as an employer is a reason to make a change in your companies. And then increased turnover. If we're firing our employees because they're victims of domestic violence and they're showing up late or having to leave early or can't go to the mandatory Saturday meeting or are absent more than others, if we're firing them, what do we have to do next? Train somebody. How much in your company, think about it, does it cost not only in man hours, but other training, to train somebody to take that person's position? So wouldn't it be more beneficial to the company to keep that employee and assist that employee than just fire him or her? Still on our costs. So I go through absenteeism, that lost productivity. I forget what study I read, but domestic violence cost employers 8 million days a year of absenteeism. 8 million days a year. And it went on to say that that is the equivalent of 32,000 full-time jobs. That's a lot of cost to an employer. If the violence is at home, the violence is coming to work. It might not be the abuser is coming to work, but on that lost productivity, as you can see from these stats, victims' concentration is compromised. They actually might have physical pain that they're dealing with. They might be saying, okay, there was violence in the home last night. Jessica and Timmy, I got them on the bus this morning, but Robbie's getting them off the bus. How am I going to get home in time to get them off the bus before Robbie gets off the bus? Because he said one day he's going to take them. What if today's the day he's going to take them? Lost concentration based on trying to figure out how to cope with whatever violence happened in the home that night. Co-workers. I just want to talk a little bit about how co-workers are affected, because they are. A lot of people, their coworker knows something is up, or they might have disclosed that there's violence in the home to a coworker, but has sworn them to secrecy. Sworn them to secrecy because of shame. They don't want anybody else to know. I always ask this one question of everybody when it comes to disclosing domestic violence. I want you to think about your deepest, darkest secret that nobody in this room knows about you. Now turn to the person to your right and tell them. That's what disclosing domestic violence is like for a victim of domestic violence, because of the shame society has put on it. But I know that we as a culture can change that, because, as I always say, back in the 70s, we all would have been smoking. There would have been ashtrays everywhere. But society decided smoking was bad, and now you basically have to smoke in your own car if you're on public property without offending anybody. So I know that we can, as a society, can all say domestic violence is just as bad as smoking, so everybody needs to stop doing it. But back to coworkers, see, so that's why I have to look at my notes sometimes. I get on these rotaries and I just keep going. So there was a study done of coworkers, which was very interesting. 31% of the coworkers that knew their coworker was in a violent relationship felt strongly that they needed to cover for their coworker. 27% said it was extremely too frequently that they covered for their coworkers' work, because they were both afraid the coworker was going to get fired. This one is upsetting to me, and I think that's why we're here, because we're going to change this. 25% of coworkers that knew their coworker was in a violent relationship resented that person, because they weren't doing their job, they weren't pulling their weight, and the coworker was having to cover for them or do their job for them. So it was resented that they were in a violent relationship. And 38%, which I thought was amazing, were concerned for their own safety because they knew the person sitting next to them was in a violent relationship. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we touch on legal liability. But you not only have an obligation to the victim of domestic violence, but also to all the employees that work in your company if this is disclosed. But I thought that was a high number. 38% thought that they were in danger. They might not even have known the abuser, but they thought they were in danger sitting in the same office with that victim. So how does it occur in the workplace? Because we know it occurs at home. We know that it follows a victim to work. What are some of the things? How does domestic violence enter into your workplace?
Telephone calls.
Telephone calls?
No shows.
No shows?
Drug abuse.
Drug abuse?
Restraining orders.
Restraining orders? Having to deal with restraining orders? How about batterer showing up? How about that guy, Robbie, that shows up? Isn't he nice? Every day, you know what, Courtney's got the nicest husband. Getting creepy that it's Robbie. Isn't he the nicest guy? Every day he shows up with her lunch. 1 o'clock, she never has to leave the office to go get lunch. She always shows up and has lunch with her in his car. Isn't he the nicest guy? What a good guy he is. That's called stalking. You know, Robbie, he's always showing up for flowers. Courtney gets flowers all the time. I wonder why. I don't know, I wonder if it correlates with that day in July Courtney wore a turtleneck to work and she got flowers that day. The promises, the I'm sorries. So a lot of things that look nice are actually violence and control and manipulation coming into your workplace. Spoofing calls. We talked about phone calls, but I've dealt with one victim, more than one, but this one particular I'm thinking of. He would call the workplace over 100 times a day. There was a receptionist that answered the phone. There are not many places now that a computer doesn't answer the phone, but there was an actual receptionist that had to answer 100 of Robbie's phone calls almost every single day. Sometimes it was more than 100. That's not only affecting Courtney's job, it's affecting the receptionist's job, and it's tying up your work line. So think of it that way, because batterers, they use the workplace and just as much their own employer's workplace as much as affecting the victim's workplace. Employers Against Domestic Violence did a study with batterers, asked batterers, okay, in your workplace, did you use any of your resources or time to actually commit acts of domestic violence or stalk your victim? 78% of them said that they used their employer's resources at least once to check up on, to threaten, to violate a restraining order. They're using their employer's resources. 74% they have said they have easy access to their partner's workplace. And let's just think about that for a minute. The victim has left the abuser. Finances, she needs her job. He doesn't know where she is anymore between 5 p.m. and 9 a.m. But between 9 and 5, he knows where she is at your workplace. And that's what creates the workplace to become a danger when somebody has left a violent relationship and the defendant doesn't know where they're living, sleeping, or staying. But 74% said they had easy access to the victim's workplace. 48% of abusers said they had a hard time concentrating and doing their own job because they were so busy thinking about what was the victim doing? Where is she? Needing to drive by her workplace. So 48% said they couldn't even do their own jobs because they were too busy abusing. And 42% of offenders were constantly late for work. You'd be amazed how many employers, because of this manipulation, this control, the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, you would be surprised how many employers bail defendants out of police stations. That, who posted his bail? Oh, wow, Joe's Printing Company. Doesn't he work there? Employers are coming because he's a good guy. That Courtney, have you seen her drink at the Christmas party? Yeah, I think it's her. So, again, it's important to remember that it is the most important thing for a victim is a steady job, a steady paycheck. Who here has a wallet? We'll do this exercise. Have your wallet with you? Okay, pull it out.
What's your PIN number?
How many kids do you have?
2.
2, okay. Open your wallet and pull out your cash.
Really?
Yeah.
She works at a bank, she doesn't have any.
How much you have?
I don't know.
Ooh, she's got a lot more than me.
I did give
I
some.
think she just went to the ATM.
Yeah.
She just gave some to her husband. Is she controlling the finances at home? She has $68?
I said 60 or 80.
60 or 80. Say it's 80. Your husband was abusive last night. It's been multiple times. You're finally ready to leave him. The only thing you have for your 2 children is that $68, because he's going to cut off your credit cards, no more ATM, no more credit cards, no more checking account. Where are you going to go?
I don't know.
Exactly. Exactly. Think about that when you're working with a victim, is she needs more than $60 or $80 in her wallet to be able to get out of that violent relationship. As we stated, your employers, you have to respond. And I applaud all of you that are here because you're taking that step to responding to domestic violence in the workplace that many employers are not taking and denying.